Breaking news. Putin has started purging top officials in Russia. Cleansing operations underway. A minister is dead, deputy head of National Guard in pre-trial detention, and Zolotov himself could be next. Those who yesterday commanded Russian army under attack, paranoia intensifying, explosions within country increasing.
That's it. Now the third one has caught fire too. Oh. Wow, and now the fourth one, this small delivery drone, has caught fire too.
Aviation collapse. Everything is up in the air. Warehouses, airfields, tankers, logistics. The Borisogledsk strike on the airfield, the fuel depot, the chemical leak. Vladivostok is under attack from the Russian Pacific Fleet. Military facilities have been destroyed. But the most important thing is the aviation collapse. Vnukovo, Sheremetyevo, Pulkovo. Over the past 2 days, more than 2,000 flights have been disrupted across Russia. Crowds, panic, riots in terminals. The hardest blow was Pulkovo, Sheremetyevo, more than $250 million. The losses amount to 20 billion rubles. And this is just the beginning. What's behind this? Everything is flying through the air. Warehouses, tankers, the elite, and Putin's vertical itself. Let's discuss with a famous political scientist and technologist. Rastislav's husband is behind him. Rastislav, I greet you.
Good afternoon.
Your impression. Let's start with the aviation collapse. In Russia, we spoke with Igor Lipsis the day before. He said that this is a significant blow to the economy of the Russian Federation. To what extent do you agree with this? This is what Ukrainian drones are doing to Moscow and St. Petersburg. These are multi-billion ruble losses for Russia. Is this serious? Or is this just a drop in the ocean for the Russian military and economic machine?
Well, when it comes to the economy, no one can explain it better than Lipsis. So let's just take his word for it a priori. But I can tell you what this means in the socio-political sense, because I constantly receive signals from there about how everyone is suffering and struggling. To get from point A to point B, you have to make the trip about 3 times. In the span of a day, you can go to a Moscow airport, but getting from the center of Moscow, a super centralized city where all of Russia's money is concentrated, to some regional outskirts where, say, the Madadova airport is located, is a whole different story. That's what I call a story with geography. And over there, you can see them. They're really suffering, really struggling. Well, pretty much like us here in Kyiv. Of course, I'm exaggerating a bit, but still, for them, it really matters a lot. Because in Moscow, they've never seen war at all. And the way Ukrainian soldiers have found a solution today, while still not violating any conventions, including the Geneva Convention. At the same time, they're causing huge inconveniences for Russians, for Muscovites, including the elite, who are now starting to relay this message to Putin that things are really bad and that they're so tired and worn out. And that's really great because Ukraine hasn't violated anything, but nevertheless, people there have felt the war one way or another. And at the same time, no one will accuse Ukraine of terrorism, unlike Putin, who engages in terror on a daily basis. I don't know about you, but for me, tonight was the first night I didn't wake up to the sound of explosions right outside my window. That's just how unlucky I am with where I live.
Right now, when I talk to military analysts, Rostislav, they say that a new stage of the war between Ukraine and Russia has begun. First of all, Mako announced ballistic missiles that will target both St. Petersburg and Moscow. Then we start attacking strategic aviation airfields after the special operation Pautina, Engulfed, airfields in Crimea and Borisogledsk, and the long-range aviation. My makeup is shocked by the bridge. How do you assess the strength of the Zorva tanker, the Pacific Fleet, and the attacked gas pipeline? How do you assess the special operations in the context of the new phase of the war against Russia?
Again, my assessment will not be economic, but political, because that's what I understand. And here it should be noted that no dictatorship has ever defeated any democratic society where there is a unified civil society. You, thank God, are on this path, a difficult and persistent path toward the best global standards, because in Ukraine today there is an absolutely clear understanding. Either Ukraine will stand firm and remain part of the free world, or it will not withstand and will end up living in Putin's concentration camp. And no one wants to live in Putin's concentration camp, except perhaps for a handful of people, probably some crazy old ladies who are nostalgic for the Soviet era. And that's precisely why the roots of the Ukrainian military success lie here, when they use their brains, when they save money, when they go above and beyond and display incredible heroism, even in situations where, for example, all those Putin's 200,000 rubles would just make people throw up their hands and surrender. That's exactly why all the aforementioned operations that Ukraine has carried out against Russia on the battlefield have been successful, That's exactly why Ukraine was able to quickly set up production despite all these bombings. That's exactly why Ukrainians never give up their positions to anyone, and Putin is desperately trying to find at least something military on Ukrainian territory in Ukrainian cities, but he can't find anything. Still, everything continues to be produced and in ever greater quantities, and this is increasingly turning Putin's Russia upside down. You yourself mentioned this just a moment ago. And of course, these operations will only expand. Of course, Ukraine's ultimate victory in this ongoing war is absolutely inevitable, because a robust system with a truly developed democratic civil society simply cannot, under any circumstances, lose to a corrupt system that operates solely on the principle of steal and run without any regard for justice or its own people. That is exactly why I always tell you that, despite all the shortcomings that exist today in how the Ukrainian government may be organized, and even though I know you probably have questions about how all of this works, but the principle itself, the path itself, Ukraine has chosen very clearly. And yes, this path is thorny and there will be many different obstacles. But nevertheless, Russia's defeat in this war is inevitable. It is absolutely irreversible.
Dear audience, please like this video, write a few kind words in support of Ukraine in the comments, as well as about geography and views. We work for an audience all over the world so that they know the truth about Russian aggression in Russia's war against Ukraine. Subscribe to my YouTube channel, it would make me happy. Subscribe to the YouTube channel Rojdestvo Muj za Golovu. The link will be in the description. Murders, elimination of ministers. What is happening?
Well, regarding the murder, actually, I wanted to correct you. Strictly speaking, this was a murder that happened not because of Putin, but because of his daughter, Ekaterina. In other words, it was a case of chercher la femme. Yes, it's an interesting situation there. It's clear that neither Katerina nor her people were the actual perpetrators, but it all started with her circle targeting their enemies, the Rotenbergs. One of the executors, in fact, was from the Rotenberg system, Starovoyt. He was the one who would carry money from government contracts to this so-called wonderful family. So when Belousov and Tikhonova started digging into this cozy little nest, naturally they were stealing everywhere, including in the Kursk region and also in those very same defense projects in the so-called mythical construction of the Dragon's Teeth fortifications. And this, of course, is an absolutely shameful story for Russia, because the president's closest friends, Putin's friends, who love to talk about how he's such a patriot and such a denazifier, well, his associates, with whom, as the rumor mill has it, he shares joint business in all Rotenberg projects to the tune of 50%. 50% for Mikhail Ivanovich, as they say about it. So it turns out that Putin himself, together with the Rotenbergs, was stealing, including from the defense contracts. This is, of course, unbelievable, but if you dig a little deeper, just look, who would believe that suddenly in the impoverished Kursk region, which is so insignificant financially that you could cover it with a hat, suddenly 20 billion is sent there, and this will be decided by some governor, some deputy, or, forgive me, Lord, some head of the Regional Development Corporation. By the way, I knew him for many years and worked with him in federal agencies, in neighboring offices back in the early 2000s. Volodya Lukin, that's his name. He's in prison now. Of course, no one would believe it. The Rotenbergs sent that money there at an initially hugely inflated cost, because those dragon's teeth are just little cement triangles. And with 20 billion, you could have dragon-teethed all of Russia. But that wasn't the point. The point was to make the Rotenbergs just a little bit richer. And this Starovoyt was carrying it out. And Smirnov, his deputy, and this Lukin, whom I've known for a long time, did the same. And when Lukin was arrested, he immediately testified against Smirnov, and Smirnov immediately testified against Starovoyt. And accordingly, when they came for Starovoyt and told him he would be fired with a wolf ticket, he said, "Then I'll testify against you, dear Rotenbergs." The Rotenbergs simply killed him, or at least made it so that a gun ended up in his hand, and told him, "This is your best option right now, or else you'll have this, this, and this in your life," meaning something that seemed even worse to him than death. So yes, this shows that shooting has practically already started in Putin's own office, because this is, of course, his absolute innermost circle. You could count people of this level of influence in Russia on the fingers of one hand, like Putin's daughter, now the most influential person, and his new favorite, Arkady Rotenberg, who for many years was his main favorite, because there's this kind of childhood attachment to his coach. I can tell you myself, as someone who did a lot of sports as a kid, I also had those kinds of coaches in Soviet times. Those uncles, those steady, authoritative figures who seemed like super authorities to you. So, as a result, everything inside Putin's system, the swamp of Gadyukin, has reached the point where they're just imprisoning and killing each other, and everyone sees it. The whole Kremlin, the whole old square, all the state institutions of the Russian Federation are now in a state of utter despair. They're all drinking heavily, crying on each other's shoulders, and realizing that this is it. This is the end game, the very final act of this whole story.
The main question is, why was Zolotov's former deputy arrested? Why are top managers in the oil and gas industry being thrown out of windows? What is happening in the elites right now? All of this is happening practically at the same time.
Well, look, here's the situation. There's still a fairly large amount of money coming in through the oil pipeline, which is drying up, but not completely yet. And these incoming funds, they realize they need to steal them very quickly because soon everything will collapse entirely. And instead of ending up wandering the world with a sack, they want to leave with a suitcase stuffed with crisp green bills. So they're all trying to snatch this money from each other to claw it away. And since these people have all gone through a kind of negative selection over decades of Putin's rule, they have no regard for morality or ethics. That's why they're quite willing to kill each other. And to avoid being scolded for yet another murder, they happily disguise it as suicide, the simplest way. If someone later starts asking what happened, well, nothing happened. The person took their own life. Everything is just fine. But if you look at it statistically, there's actually a science called statistics, which I struggled with at a Paris business school where I was taught by good professors, by the way, who were consultants to then President Sarkozy, or maybe it was already Hollande, doesn't matter. The point is, they showed us how to calculate such situations. And if you count the number of these suicides among Russian elites, it just doesn't add up. Even with all the margins of error, even considering that maybe they have such stressful lives, poor things, suffering so much, even with all that factored in, the number of suicides among these Putin-era elites is thousands or tens of thousands of times higher than among ordinary people who, in theory, have far more reasons to end their lives, if you don't count outhouses and the like. Nevertheless, this statistical excess tells us that these cases are not at all what they are made out to be. These are, to a significant extent, murders. And as for Starovoytov, I am personally about 95% sure that it was definitely not a suicide, because a person like that would never shoot himself in the head unless he was facing something truly dire like quartering or breaking on the wheel. But even then, it's unlikely because they cling to life to the very end. They know they have a huge stash of money buried somewhere under an apple tree, and they all hope they'll get out of prison fairly quickly, that their time inside will be fine. By the way, everyone does fine in there. I looked into this, and at Lefortovo I was treated quite decently. No abuse, nothing like what happens to ordinary prisoners. So no, of course it's murder.
Rusislav, regarding that series of murders we just discussed, are we correct in understanding that it won't weaken the Putin regime in any way?
Well, no, why would it? On the contrary, this actually shakes the Putin regime from within very powerfully, because those on the inside fully understand that these are not just suicides, not just accidents. They know perfectly well that just like in a bad mafia movie, everyone now has a one-way ticket. They can't escape from this deserted island where they've all been gathered, like the 10 little soldiers in Agatha Christie's novel. In reality, there's nowhere left to run. It's a gilded cage, and at some point being there stops feeling pleasant, and you want to escape somewhere, but now you can't even get out by going to prison. Before, as they used to joke among themselves, when someone got arrested, they'd just do a little time, some a few months, some a year. It was all pretty easy going. Then with good behavior, they'd get out on parole and live a carefree life somewhere in the Caribbean with millions stashed under the apple trees. But now even that's not possible. Now the only way out is a bullet to the head through the special military operation or something similar. They don't like any of this. And that's why, of course, those who realize it's all over are forced to stage these timid little rebellions, like the ones at the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum. For example, someone I've known personally for a long time, the Minister of Economy, Maxim Reshetnikov, and also a well-known lawyer, Makarov, who has headed the State Duma's Budget Committee for, I think, about 20 years now. Without him, it's impossible to pass or execute Russia's budget because he's the only one who knows where all the stashes are. He managed to tie everything to himself, set up all the connections with the various agencies and so on. And he basically tells Putin, almost to his face, that if you don't urgently put an end to this, you'll end up like the Soviet Union.
Ratislav, we're coming to an important topic. Donald Trump has made a decision. Today, there is good news. Trump promised Zelensky to provide all the weapons he possibly can, and as much as the United States of America can afford. Here comes the quote. Trump assured Zelensky that the US will provide as much military aid as they can afford. We will send more weapons. We are compelled to do this. They must be able to defend you. I am very disappointed in Putin, honestly. I am disappointed that Putin did not stop. I am not at all satisfied with Putin. The US will send Ukraine additional weaponry for the country's defense, and Trump promised Zelensky to immediately send 10 Patriot interceptor missiles, as well as to assist in finding additional supply channels. What does this mean globally?
Well, this means that we were right on the money, because in our streams we've said many times that if we see the pendulum swing in Putin's favor from the American side, it will inevitably swing back the other way. This is because of the position of the American public, which is that the American president is the leader of the free world, and he has no moral right to support a dictatorship or abandon a country that has chosen to become part of the free world, to abandon Ukraine, because that would be a betrayal, after which faith in the American myth would end all over the world. The whole world is glued to their TV screens today, watching to see how this war ends, and it cannot end in defeat for the free world, because the free world is stronger. Those flirtations between the master of the Oval Office and the master of the Kremlin, of course, were disgusting, without a doubt. All of this is the doing of that shaggy gentleman, an accomplice in numerous Putin crimes in Ukraine. But in any case, he couldn't keep this up for long, and he managed to squeeze something out of this Pinocchio, as you know. He squeezed out quite a bit because, for example, that gas pipeline, which quietly ended up in the pockets of some, let's say, Cheburashkas, who I'm sure are just bagmen for that same shaggy gentleman, and that's no small thing. That's a huge money pipeline. And maybe he realized that this is where he should stop, because his ratings were starting to slip. The grumbling that started in the American establishment is now turning into a roar directed at the master of the Oval Office. If he had kept this up, it could have started to smell like defeat, for example, in the upcoming midterm elections, which are inexorably approaching. And then there's Musk, who's clearly going to throw a wrench in the works. And that's very good and very timely for us. I was very happy when that happened, because I understood that it would force Musk's former friend and former Tesla buyer to become a more reliable helper for Ukraine. So overall, things aren't bad. Yes, I expected a statement like this. I knew this pause wouldn't last long, because he really doesn't have that option. And yes, of course, it was very stupid and incompetent to announce that the Pentagon was out of stock, like in the old Soviet days. You wouldn't remember, but I saw it, like a store window with a sign saying inventory. Well, we saw that sign for a few days, but obviously, what kind of inventory are we talking about? They have enough weapons to defeat Putin 20 times over, or 100. So basically, the inventory game is over, and the store manager has once again taken pity and is selling us what we need.
Protislav, a very well-known Republican, messaged me at night saying that, according to his sources, not only will Trump increase aid to Ukraine, but he will also give the green light to the Senate and the Senate's rolling committee to start the procedure for voting on sanctions against Russia. There are rumors that new weapons will be supplied, ones that have never been given to anyone before, by the Republicans, and with the deployment of military experts. Let's discuss this. And the sanctions that the Senate might vote on. What awaits the Russian dictator?
You know what my source in Washington, who works there as a lobbyist, said about Putin's latest antics?
Go ahead, tell us.
He said that everyone is fed up with Putin there, and that all sorts of options are possible now, up to and including giving the nod. A nod from the Americans that someone could simply solve this problem. This problem could be solved by Ukrainians or by certain members of Putin's elite who are also fed up with him. And accordingly, well, no matter how long the rope lasts, no matter how long you play these games of obedience, sooner or later it all ends. When you challenge the whole world while being just a gas station country that hasn't created a damn thing, can't even make nails to this day, and still hasn't managed to replace, for God's sake, the old AN2 crop duster, yet now they're going to dictate their will to the whole world. Now they're going to present themselves as the leader of the global south, which is supposedly about to overturn the hegemony of America and Europe. Seriously? You haven't even grown the claws yet to overturn anything in this sense, have you? And that's why sooner or later someone is going to shove that cat into the mess it has made.
You know, I think the Prime Minister of Israel made a very strategically sound move Netanyahu put forward, in my opinion.
It was so funny to watch this move. Honestly, I even felt a bit embarrassed for Netanyahu. I understand that now he's going to start explaining.
Yes, look, everyone is discussing how to communicate with Trump in order to achieve results. And as a political technologist, you can break this down step by step. What should Netanyahu do? Netanyahu is openly flattering Trump. He comes to him, issues get resolved, and as a result, Trump made a decision on a special operation against Iran and helped to maximally destroy or at least hinder their nuclear program. So what should Netanyahu do now? He has nominated Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize. Is this move Could this move make Trump act in such a way that he would destroy Putin and stop the war? I'm asking for your advice. What do you think?
Dasha, as a strategist, I'm proposing a strategic solution. You have a very popular channel, you get millions of views. Let's announce a flash mob right now among Ukrainians, among reasonable people from other countries. Let's call on everyone right now. I don't know, maybe create a petition on change.org, or we can start it ourselves. And let's invite all our viewers to join in and write to Donald Fredovich, telling him, "Dear Donald, all of Ukraine and everyone who sympathizes with us is ready to nominate you not just for the Nobel Peace Prize, but for all the other prizes at the same time. Chemistry, physics, literature. Why not even for jumping aside? If you rascal, just give us something that could at least protect the country, the children, women, and the elderly from these insane shells flying daily onto the heads of Ukrainians." Let's write such an appeal to him. Let's tell him we'll nominate him for everything, including literature and jumping aside. Of course, this is all absolute nonsense, and it shouldn't be this way. According to the books I read in my youth, when I was only thinking about working in this field, it was assumed that a politician should have a certain sense of responsibility and some detachment from their own ego. But now we're living in that very unfortunate time in this kind of interseason between civilizational epochs. That is, we have already lived through industrialism, and we are now approaching the digital era, the network era. But at this turning point between epochs, those conservative politicians of the industrial age who lived by certain rules, there were huge shortcomings in that era, of course. It's clear there was vertical power. It's clear there was super elitism. They decided everything for everyone, but at least they had some rules for interacting with each other. And there were rules not to insult each other the way people like Putin and others do today. There simply wasn't the right to such outrageous scenes as we see in the Oval Office now. And accordingly, right now, we still haven't reached an adequate stage of development when many people will be able to solve all the remaining problems, when there will be a network, when there will be a digital society, the kind I write about in my books, in my PhD dissertations, and so on. So accordingly, at such turning points, clowns like that redhead appear, and as a result, you get situations where, well, someone, let's put it this way, I don't want to be rude on air in front of a lovely lady. Someone did something to him, let's say curtsied. I'll use that word curtsied instead of the other word that came to mind, which starts with an M. And so in response, he helped an entire country avoid probable destruction, just for a moment. You see, yes, a curtsy on one hand, and on the other, destruction. And that's what a clown like that redhead balances out. And so, well, let's keep playing this clown show. This game can be played not just by 2, but by 1,000,000 people. Well, let's write him an appeal. Let's send it to him under every one of his posts from, I don't know, the last 10 days. Let him see it. Let his entourage see it too. Because right now you can call what's happening around him servicing, because that's exactly what it is, servicing. And even from the side of the leaders of countries, it's the same thing. I can comment on it that way.
To sum up, we've always said that oil prices are very important. And oil prices, energy resources, these are what give Putin the ability to continue the war. Right now, we see that Europe is not ready yet. America is against it. Let's remember that at the G7 summit, Trump made a statement. He actually left the summit early, that America does not support lowering the oil price cap. There's no talk at all about banning or restricting it. They're fine with anything above 60. Now, as you see it, is it possible for Europe together with America to make a decision to lower oil prices so that Putin no longer has the means to wage this war?
Well, Europe is now at a kind of moment of truth when they are openly talking about devastating sanctions, saying very harsh things. They have finally raised their defense budgets to 5% and included Ukraine in these defense budgets, which is very important. As a former official, I can tell you that when an official sees in the budget that Ukraine is mentioned in a positive way and that it should be helped, then irreversibility has set in. And then, those numbers are already there. They've been set in motion, and now they just keep going, living and working on their own. And that's why all of this puts me in a somewhat optimistic mood. I think at this point they won't be able to say, well, we tried but couldn't do it. No, for them, these are existential questions now, because either they defeat all these Putins, all this homosyatina, and everything else that's trying to turn the world upside down and solve problems through bloody mass atrocities. And accordingly, if they lose to all of this, then Europe as such will cease to exist. And there will be some other organization, it will be called something else. And this has happened many times throughout history. For example, I am descended from the Alans and Sarmatians, yes, because I am Bashkir. And these Alans and Sarmatians once made it all the way to the middle of Europe. And there were also the Huns who conquered all of Europe. So if the Europeans, Macron, the Germans, and all the rest suddenly want to find themselves living again in the state of the Huns or the Alans and Sarmatians, well, as they say, welcome. But something tells me they probably won't want that.
Let's invest in our audience. Please like this video and leave a few kind words in the comments in support of Ukraine. We work for an audience all over the world so that people know the truth about Russian aggression, about Russia's actions against Ukraine. That's why every comment and every subscription helps ensure that as many people as possible around the world see this video. Subscribe to the YouTube channel Rostislav Muj Zagulovo and also subscribe to my YouTube channel Dash Shastlivaya. Rostislav Muj Zagulov is a well-known political scientist and political analyst. Thank you very much, and I hope to see you again soon.
I hope so too, Dash Shastlivaya.